in the back of the head, through the scalp, through the right temporal bone, into the brain, piercing the brain. She used this knife to slit him across the throat 3 times on the right side. She stabbed him 3 times on the left side. And if that wasn't enough, she brutally stabbed him 3 times on the left side of the chest, with one of the blows piercing Alex's lung.
Alex terrified her. He cut her. He strangled her. He has a knife. She's afraid. Frozen in her fear, she lays still. Her disturbed and obsessive ex-boyfriend attacked her, cut her, strangled her. She wanted to live. She fought to survive. She's here fighting again. Vote not guilty.
During his lifetime, did you ever witness Alex be violent towards others?
Never, not ever. He was always the person that people had got in high school. He's the person that people would come to talk to. He was the listener.
Tell us which of those injuries had the greatest impact on his death.
From that of the autopsy, that would be the sharp force injury to the head, so number 1. The sharp force injuries 2 through 4 to the right side of Mr. Woodworth's neck. They would have bled profusely. And sharp force injury number 12 to the scrotum, that again bled profusely.
I'm County 911. What's the address of the emergency?
This is Don Sipple calling, and I have a young lady that just came to my house, and somebody attacked her, and she needs a doctor. Her clothes are all torn, and...
Okay. And is she injured?
Yeah, she's injured. Her mouth is kind of got some blood around it, and her clothes are all torn.
Okay. And she's by herself?
She's by herself. She walked to my house here just recently.
Okay. And can you ask her what her name is?
Just hold on a second.
Okay.
What's your name, ma'am? What? You don't know?
Did you ask the patient, what do you remember about the incident?
Yes.
And how did she respond?
Patient states, I don't know. I just think I was raped. It hurts.
When I came in with a clean slate, I looked at a patient that came in with an alleged sexual assault that could have been assaulted by someone else. And actually the surprise to me was the wounds were, looked to me like they were self-inflicted. When I saw the wounds on her arm.
They were both going through some things in life, and she had, she had been through something traumatic. He had been through traumatic things. So they kind of bonded over, like, misery loves company kind of thing.
Where were you cutting him?
I just was going anywhere and everywhere I could,
Okay.
just to get him off of me and get away from me.
And did the knife actually make contact with him?
Yes.
Okay.
And even then, he just kept grabbing me and grabbing me and grabbing me.
Okay. So he kept grabbing you after you were stabbing him?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then what happened?
And then after that, she left the car, and he was laying there, and I didn't know what to do.
Okay. So then what happened?
And then so I just waited, and I was confused and scared, and I was just like coming in and out of it. Like it would get dark for a little bit, and then I would come out of it, and I would panic again and hyperventilate, and then it would get dark again.
Okay.
And then I just started running.
I'm trying to make my way to the open door. Alex grabs me by the throat, and I'm pressed, my body and my head is pressed against the driver's side back of the seat. At this point is that I could feel the knife start to graze and cut into my skin. I'm afraid he's going to kill me because he has a knife, and I'm afraid that he's going to take whatever he wants and he's just going to finish this.
Well, you decided to name him the groin. Did you actually do it?
Yes.
What happens then?
He reacts and he drops the knife at that point.
When he drops the knife, what do you do?
Instantly, I grab the knife. This is when I began to defend myself and stab Alex.
Are you trying to kill him?
No.
What are you trying to do?
I just want to get away. I need to get out of the car. I need to get away as fast as I could.
Is that wound what you would call a defensive wound?
Yes, it's certainly consistent with a defensive wound.
I prescribed 2 different diagnoses for the defendant. The first was post-traumatic stress disorder, with depersonalization and derealization. And I also diagnosed the presence of persistent depressive disorder with anxious distress.
Memories of highly stressful and traumatic experiences tend to be pretty fragmented. And there's this paradox where there's a lot of missing pieces, but some of the pieces you do have, you may never forget them for the rest of your life.
She's confronted with facts. She's confronted with the truth. Her story evolves, and her story changes. That's not someone who's telling the truth. That's someone who's trying just one more lie. Just one more lie to get out of being forced to take responsibility for the murder, the cold-blooded killing of Alex Woodworth.
This is a case about self-defense. That's what this case is about. It's not about Ezra's relationships with other men. It's not about Jason Mengo. It's not about the missing witness that you never heard from, John Hanson. It's not about whether she's posted racy photos of herself. It's not about all the drama going on at coffee shops in Eau Claire. This is about Ezra and Alex. What happened between those two people in the back seat of a car.
This was not anger. This was rage, and this was personal. The defendant needs to be held accountable for her actions. The state has shown beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant, the self-described Tricky Fox, has committed the crime of first-degree intentional homicide, and I ask that you find her guilty.
Mr. McCandless, please rise. We, the jury, find the defendant, Ezra J. McCandless, guilty of first-degree intentional homicide as charged in the information. And the answer to the special verdict question is yes, use a dangerous weapon.
Welcome back. Wisconsin jury convicted 22-year-old Ezra McCandless of first-degree intentional homicide on November 1st of last year. Well, tomorrow she will find out her punishment. Judge James Peterson has a lot of leeway here. He has the power to sentence her to life without parole, or, as they call it in Wisconsin, supervised release. He could also give her the opportunity to be released from prison at some point after she serves a minimum of 20 years. Still with us in Cleveland, Ohio, criminal defense attorney Ian Friedman. Ian, this is an interesting case that our viewers were fascinated by this trial. She's been convicted of first-degree murder. The state wants her to be sentenced to life without parole. The defense has a couple arguments that they have given to the court why she should have some light at the end of the tunnel, why she should have parole. I want to go through some of them with you and get your interpretation on them and your opinion. Let's start with age. 22 years old. Yep. She's got a long life ahead of her. How does age factor in to the extent of being a mitigating factor? Because her victim was young as well.
Yeah, it's a very big deal, and it's really become a much larger issue just in the last few years as the United States Supreme Court in a very Miller versus Alabama really looked at a juvenile's brain. Now here you had someone who was 20 years old at the time, but the case and all the science it was based on really focused on the fact that up until the age of 25, people's brains are still developing. And so the court made it very difficult to give a young person life without parole. And it calls on the court to really look at all of the mental health issues that are there. And as we heard the doctor testify in this case, there certainly was a history of mental illness, you know, the PTSD, the anxiety and the depression, and not just your normal stuff where people say I'm depressed, but really, you know, debilitating levels and the trauma and the incidents that she sustained throughout her life. So the defense is really going to be hitting on that. And that's why they're going to be asking for the opportunity to have another judge revisit this in 20 years to see whether or not at that point she's been rehabilitated and whether or not she poses a danger to the community. So it's a big deal, Ted.
The defense is also citing the fact that The victim's grandparents, who they were at the trial throughout, they have, in a pre-sentencing report, they said they'd like to see 25, have her serve 25 and then open it up to parole. How important is that when you have a victim family member, or two in this case, recommending some leniency?
So it would be fantastic as the defense lawyer to have that, but it would be nice to have the entire family. So, we've all been involved in situations where one or some of the family members feel a certain way and others don't. You still have the mother of the victim who's going to get up there and have to talk about the loss of her son. You're going to have the prosecutors getting up there and talking about the way that it was done with the 16 slashes across the body. You're going to hear a lot of similar testimony that you heard in the case about just the heinous nature of this offense. So it helps, but I don't think it's going to save the day necessarily.
The state is also bringing up the fact that she apparently, according to the state, had a fascination with psychopaths. She wrote a term paper in high school on Ted Bundy. How much of that comes in? Because a high school term paper, could or could not really go into the mind of a high school student. It could just be that she got this idea and wrote a paper and didn't think twice about it.
Right. And that's really, you've got one fact here and both sides are describing it differently and bringing its value or lack thereof to the court's attention. It doesn't help the defense. I mean, clearly it doesn't help. But I would argue that it was just as you said. This was a paper that was written. It was a fact sort of paper. And there were a lot of differences in it. She was talking about someone as heinous as Ted Bundy, but in a historic manner. So it's not something that I would want brought up, but I think it's something that can be dealt with. It certainly has to be dealt with. But I think they have bigger issues to deal with. There were a lot of issues in this case that came up that are not good facts for her, and that's why it took the jury only 3 hours. I think their biggest problem tomorrow is going to be when the court is looking to determine whether or not she has remorse, whether or not she's sorry for what happened. You can't help but remember she just testified and said, I don't have any remorse because I was defending myself. So the defense has really got to kind of parlay this and say, yeah, she was defending herself, but yes, she's sorry that she's in this position. And at the same time, they also have to be cognizant of the fact that anything she says may undermine any sort of appeal she's doing. So tomorrow is going to be an extremely difficult day for the defense.
Quick prediction. What do you think the judge is going to do?
Tough one to say. I'll tell you why. Because it's an elected judge. He's a former district attorney of 20 years, and it's on media. I think somewhere between the 25 to life without parole. I don't see the defense getting the release at 20.
All right. I agree completely. There's a lot of pressure there, especially because it's a high-profile case in a small community. Ian Friedman, thank you. Coming up next, the ice cream truck murder trial.